Shalom and welcome, all my brothers and sisters of all colors, all backgrounds. I welcome you. I mean this video out of love and respect to all people of all colors and all backgrounds. I mean this video with love in my heart and to educate. I am not making this video for hate or to mock any people, no matter what background, because we were all made in the image of God. Wickedness is in the man's heart. People are not born wicked. They are taught wickedness and choose to do evil and to do wickedness. Racist, hateful theology, hatred, racism, lies, none of this has anything in any part of Torah, period. So therefore, I will debunk this fake, phony movement. A real Israelite teacher will debunk this movement in 5 minutes, and I'll show you why. Number one, this fake movement called the Hebrew Israelites, period, the end, most of them hate the whole idea of DNA. Why? Because DNA supports the truth, the reality of the mighty nation of Cush, which ended up being the black race today, of the African Horn. DNA proves that all origin of black Americans, African Americans, originate in the African Horn. E1B1A is not Hebrew DNA. It is African Horn origins. Look it up, African Horn, so you can see what the land was. Okay? Now we, as Israelites, real Israelites, when we do our DNA, our origins, meaning where it originates on the list, the origins always shows the same thing. Levant corridor. See where it's circled? That's where the land of Israel is. That's our origins according to DNA, which we already knew. Without DNA, we have family lineage, birth dates and death dates. We have an unbroken chain. So, right out the gate, DNA debunks the claims that they are the true Hebrews. It's not true. Period. Next, one of the other fake claims that they make is that we are descendant of Khazars. We are fake Jews who are nothing but converts in the 8th or 9th century. Again, this is complete nonsense. All you have to do, it doesn't take very long, it doesn't take very long at all. Look up anti-Semitism, church fathers. Please Google it right now. Don't believe me. Look what our European friends wrote about us, and I will leave the links below so you can look up for yourself. Everybody, from Ignatius of Antioch, to Justin Martyr, to Martin Luther, from the 1st century, all the way through the Middle Ages, they said, from the 1st century, that's 2,000 years ago, that these Jews came from the land of Jerusalem, the land of Israel, and their temple was destroyed because they killed our Christ, and they're never going back. Jews and Judaism was mentioned as far back as the 1st century, period. And I'll leave the links below so you can look it up for yourself. I have other videos with more details on this. Another problem, light to the nations. The Torah says that through your seed, Abraham, you will be a light and a blessing to all the nations. And it says you will be a light to the nations. These fake, phony, Cushite movements, liars, are not a light to the nations. They are not educating the nations. They're not loving the nations and caring and being an example to the nations. They're showing their whole agenda to the nations. It's black supremacy. So no, you're not a light to the nations. That's another big problem. Another problem, the Torah says that the real Israelites, the real Jews, will always be few in number. Well, let's take a look. How many black people exist today? Approximately 1 billion black people on earth today. 1 billion. How many have always existed among Israelites, the Jews? Between 12 to 14 million, all throughout history. Very small in number. Many people are shocked to know this truth, that we have always been small in number. But it's the truth. There's no comparison whatsoever.
Hosea chapter 1 verses 10 and 11. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass, that in the place where it was said unto them, Ye are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, Ye are the sons of the living God. Then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together, and appoint themselves one head, and they shall come up out of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel.
Another problem. The Torah says, the whole Hebrew scripture says, that there will always be a righteous remnant, a small group of Israelites throughout history that would always be keeping the covenant in righteousness. That is not the case with them. They never were. They're claiming the opposite. No, we lost our covenant. We fell asleep. We lost our heritage. It's a big problem. Big problem. We have always remained as a righteous remnant, keeping the covenant. Who do you think the Pharisees were? The Pharisees were one sect of Israel. Today they're called Orthodox Jews. That's right. It's time for an education. Orthodox Jews are a direct lineage to the Pharisees. Pharisees lived 2,000 years ago, even further back. You see it in the New Testament, the Greek scriptures that you love so much. Pharisees. What do you think they're arguing with Jesus about? Why do you not wash your hands? Like the tradition of the elders. Where do you think that comes from? That's Talmudic tradition. That's 2,000 years ago. It was still back then. They were well established in that time. So they were not newcomers. They were well established. We had the Sadducees, the Samaritans who never left Israel when we were taken out. Ethiopian Jews are close to us. The Lema, African Jews, who I hope and pray will come back home to their land. They have our blood in them. They themselves will tell you that they do not originate among the original Hebrews. They tell you their story, that they are converts who joined Israel through Moshe and his Cushite wife. Yes, Moshe had a Cushite wife, a black woman, which we'll get into that as well. Now for you Tanakh alone, fake Hebrews, who learned from us, they realized that we didn't care about them or their claims because they're nothing but a bunch of Christians with racism and hatred in their hearts, so we ignored them. They go, why are they ignoring us? So they started watching our videos and seeing that we always have believed in only the Hebrew scriptures. So they fix their theology, they correct it, they believe in Tanakh alone, they go, aha, now we're the real Israelites. No, sorry. History doesn't show that, DNA doesn't show that, nothing shows that. You're still not the real Hebrews. You still have racism and hatred in your heart and lies that are not true about us and that are not true about you. Period. Another point that's very important. Now let's go to the positive. Real Israelite way, real Torah life, and Torah living. We are taught more than any other commandment in the Torah. You must not mistreat the strangers. The ger, or goyim, whatever you want to say. It's the strangers, the nations. This is not a bad word. The nations that are non-Jews, we are not to mistreat them. Period. And yet, what do you see? You see them openly condemning, mocking, cursing out all the nations, all the peoples. Another point, the Greek non-Testament, the New Testament. No Hebrew in history ever believed in the New Testament. If you have the New Testament Christian Bible and your Apocrypha and your Susanna and your this and your that, get out of here. You might as well have a Septuagint. No Hebrew ever kept the non-Testament, the Greek scriptures. Period. The end. That alone is game over. For you Tanakh only ones, again, I told you, this doesn't make you legit just because you disagree with them. You're still not legit. But for you who's following the New Testament, not even worth mentioning. Another point, fake information, fake claims. Too many of these. They quote stuff like, a king in Egypt says, you left black and you came back white. One person. No one else mentions that. The Samaritans don't know anything about that. I know them personally. Ethiopian Jews don't say that. African Lema Jews do not say that at all. And I speak to them all the time. Ethiopian Jews as well. They're my brothers and sisters. They never talk about that. Fake information. The Khazar theory, the 13th tribe. That stupid book that they believe in. You guys are Khazars. That book is mocked by every single scholar today. That is a joke of a book, just like these movements. A joke. It has been debunked several times by history. You don't need no analysis to prove that's wrong. Again, I have videos already disproving all this stuff already. It's getting boring. We did not come from Europe. We came from Israel. And all the European leaders knew this and wrote about it. We were not welcome there. So your whole Khazar nonsense goes out the door, period. Another problem, their theology that only Israelites will inherit God's kingdom and everyone else will be their slaves. They want to be slave masters. Exactly what they're complaining about and being the victim about. Something that they never went through, their ancestors did, who didn't act like them. But yet they're saying that they want to be slave owners. You're going to be my slave in the new God's kingdom. I can't wait for you to be my slave. Oh, I'm going to ask for your head in the kingdom of God. None of you who have this theology, none of you will inherit God's kingdom. I guarantee you that. You will not be in God's kingdom. No wickedness, no evil vermin rats like yourselves in your theology. None of you are going to God's kingdom. Guaranteed by Scripture. Evil will not be there. Only good, righteous, kind-hearted, the meek will inherit the earth. Let me start quoting some scriptures. And they go, why don't you take it from the scripture? Okay, I'll take you to the scriptures. You better believe I'm going to take you to the scriptures. Here we go. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 33. When a stranger lives among you in the land, listen carefully, you dum-dums, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the ger, the stranger, as a native. A native. What is a native? Someone who was there before your stupid butts. Our stupid butts. Anyone's butts. You will treat him as a native among you. You shall love him as yourself. Well, wait a minute. They're teaching us, this is not talking about the nations. This is not talking about non-Jews or non-Israelites. This is speaking about people that are going to convert. No, it's not. It's telling you straight there. You shall love him as yourself. It should say, love him because he is part of you. He will be part of you. No, as yourself. For you, here's the key. God always left the evidence. I love it. God left the evidence. For you were strangers in Egypt. I am Yehovah. You're not going to be in the kingdom. You're not going to be there. Not going to be there at all. You can dream that you're going to be there. You're not going to be there. All scum will be gone off the earth. I can go on and on. Isaiah chapter 11 speaks about the real Messianic age. Now they claim that Moshe had to be, the Israelites were black. They had to be black. How did he go to Egypt? How did he show leprosy on his arm? Because it's just absolute stupidity. It's very obvious you don't have to be black for leprosy to show. But of course, you have to be according to this theology. Again, the Hebrews were light brown. I showed images of this before in my other videos. The Hebrews were depicted as light brown, and so were the Egyptians. They were not black. Only in the 25th dynasty, for 100 years, were the Cushite, soon-to-be African Horn culture, did they take over Egypt in the 25th dynasty, for 100 years. That's why you find some statues that look like black statues, because they took over for 100 years. But they were drawn over and over as light brown, pointy noses. Some had red hair, some had green eyes, bright eyes, blue eyes. They were not black, period. Numbers chapter 12, verse 1. Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife. He was with a black woman, and his brother and sister spoke against him. And it says there, for emphasis, in case you didn't or don't believe it, it says, for she had married a Cushite. So it's emphasizing the reason why they were so upset and speaking against him was because she was a Cushite. She was a colored woman. And because of that, God condemned them and punished them, made them suffer, because this is bigotry. So they paid for that. I can go on and on. I have many videos on this topic. The Torah is against all these things. Correct your theology and come to true Israel. No one will inherit God's kingdom with this evil theology. It's based on lies, nonsense, and no evidence whatsoever that's factual. There was always a righteous remnant among Israel. We are the true Israelites. All people are welcome to join Israel. So, enough with this nonsense, enough with this stupidity. Stop disrespecting your ancestors. Stop disrespecting your people. It's disgraceful.
Now let's debunk some of the black Hebrew Israelite nonsense, deceptive, destructive nonsense that's out there. Spread this widely. We are audio only today, but anyone can take issue with any point I've made. We'll open the phones to black Hebrew Israelites next Thursday. I invite you to call and challenge me on any point that I have raised factually, not emotionally, factually. All right. Number one, Deuteronomy 28. Deuteronomy 28:68. This is the last verse in the list of curses that will come on the people of Israel if we disobey the Lord. First, it's very bizarre that there are people boasting, look at how disobedient we've been. We have been the worst of all. That proves that we're the real Israelites. Oh, that's a boast now. We alone have been so cursed. Well, if you've been so cursed, it's because you've been so disobedient. So that's the first thing you're boasting about. Look at how disobedient we've been in history. I didn't know that was something to boast about. But if you are boasting about it, that's a bad boast to have. I point you to the cross where you can find salvation and forgiveness. Not only so, nowhere does it say in Deuteronomy that every single one of these curses has come to pass, that the people of Israel disobeyed on a level sufficient for all of them to come to pass. But let's say they did come to pass. Then the one group of people we know this is not referring to is Africans, blacks. That we know. Why? Because of the last verse of Deuteronomy 28, which says this, V'hashivcha Adonai Mitzrayim. So the Lord shall bring you back to Mitzrayim, ba'oniot, in ships, b'derech asher amarti lecha, lo tosif od lirotah. By the way of which I said to you, you'll not see it again. V'hit makartem sham lo'oyevecha, and you will sell yourselves to your enemies. You will sell yourselves to your enemies. Okay? That's what the Hebrew says. You shall offer yourselves. It is the hitpael. It is reflexive. So from the root machar, to sell. This is simple grammar. Anyone with a few weeks of Hebrew would then understand the use of hitpael when you're learning verbal forms. That's how it's used here. All right? It is reflexive. Anyone who can read Hebrew fluently, there's no argument or debate. You will sell yourselves. It's not saying you'll be kidnapped. Okay? It's not saying you will be kidnapped, and then after being kidnapped, will now offer yourselves. No. You will sell yourselves. And you'll sell yourself there to your enemies, lavadim, for slaves, for male slaves and female slaves, but there'll be no one to buy you. No one will buy you. No one will buy you. So let's look at the horrific African slave trade. Let's look at the sins of America and the sins of the Europeans against the people of Africa. And of course, the slave trade in Africa was a slave trade within Africa. Africans enslaving other Africans. And there are African Christians who believe that the European and American slave trade of Africans was a judgment on the Africans for their own slave trade. And we, in turn, as Americans, suffered the terrible judgment of the Civil War and other judgments because of our mistreatment of blacks, our horrific, inexcusable mistreatment of Africans, of blacks in our history, and right up through the days of segregation, and in some parts of America, right up until today. Inexcusable, sinful, ugly, period. Simple. Wrong. That being said, this verse cannot apply to the Africans who were sold into slave trade. First, you didn't sell yourselves. Black Hebrew Israelites, you didn't sell yourselves into slavery. You didn't say, hey, let's see who wants to buy us. And more importantly, people, we meaning Americans, not me, not as in I wasn't here. My Jewish descendants didn't get here from Russia until the turn of the 20th century. So we had nothing to do with that slave trade. But I'm saying as a white American, we bought you, okay? We sinned and bought you. You had buyers. You have had buyers around the world. So you're not the people it's talking about. You are not the people it's talking about. You didn't sell yourselves, and people bought you. So the one verse you quote constantly cannot possibly apply to you. End of that subject. Period. Not only so, if you said, okay, well, then who did this apply to? There are times in Israel's history where this well could have applied. For example, a very reliable scholarly source, the IVP, Bible Background Commentary to the Old Testament, notes Deuteronomy 28:68, Assyrian kings of the 7th century. So this is crushing the Israelites, bringing them into captivity in the 8th century, now in the 7th century, coerced their vassals into supplying troops for their military campaigns. One way then for Israelites to return to Egypt in ships would be in the Assyrian campaigns launched from the Phoenician coast, in which they were obliged to take part. This represents continued oppression by foreign enemies, as the curses have detailed. Another possibility would include falling victim to Egypt's slave trade in Syro-Palestine, where the slaves were often transported by ship. So there are even possibilities in Israelites' history and even nuances in some prophetic books that could easily point in this direction. Now you might say, look, not every slave was bought. So there are some that weren't purchased. No, Deuteronomy 28:68 says nobody will buy you. Nobody will buy you. So in this case, people would say, right, just take us as slaves then. And people still would. People still would.
Greetings to the 12 tribes of Israel. I am Cohen Hamandishe. I'm greeting you from Zimbabwe, from Africa. As I've said that I'm Cohen Hamandishe. I'm one of the elders of the Lemba elders. Of the 12 houses of the Lemba, I'm from the Buba house. I'm the founder of B'nai Aaron Lemba Ministries. And also Hope for Children Ministries. As I have already said, I'm targeting my video to the 12 houses of Israel who are scattered across the globe. Now, Romans chapter 1 verse 16 says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, which is the power of Adonai for salvation. We find that a lot of our people are in diaspora. A lot of our people are in diaspora. They are there. We are here in diaspora because of our forefathers. It's not because of our choice, but because of our fathers. What led our fathers to leave the Holy Land is because of various issues or various things which led them to leave the Holy Land. Now, there are two groups we find in diaspora. The first group is the lost tribe of Israel, and the second group is the hidden tribe of Israel. Now, the lost tribe, it means that on the lost tribe, they lost everything in diaspora. They became too assimilated in their hosts, in their countries of hosts, so much so that they lost their identity, they lost their language, they lost their race, so much so that even now today, they cannot accurately pinpoint which house of Israel they belong to. They cannot accurately pinpoint that I am from the house of Reuben, I am from the house of Gadi, or from the house of Manasseh. They cannot do that because they have been assimilated and they have lost that identity. But there's hope for return back. Because the Torah says that, Adonai says that, I'll return you back. So many verses which support that he is going to bring us back to the Holy Land, to the land of which he promised to our forefathers. There is a massive discovery of our people, of the Lemba people in the African American community. A lot of our people are there. Most of them are Lembas. And they have also discovered that some of them are from the house of Judah. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they come to that. But we have a lot of our people in Africa. There's this thing which is going on today. There's this awakening which is going on today. Some people are seeing this as a joke of the century. When they see these people now awakening to the reality that they are Israelites, they think that it's a joke of the century. They see it as a fallacy. They see it as an imagination. These people are just imagining things. They see that these people are just parading their ignorance about the Bible. These people are just parading their ignorance. But the thing is, this is the way Adonai works. That which you believe that is nothing is the thing that Adonai wants to use. Somewhere in the Bible, it says that the first will be the last, and the last will be the first. Now, you see that when you are in exile for too long, you tend to lose your Torah. All the Israelites who are out of Israel today, most of them have lost their Torah. They have lost the way of their fathers. They have lost it. But praise be to Hashem. Jeremiah tells us on Jeremiah 6 verse 16 that look for the old paths. Look for the Torah. Look where the old paths, where your fathers used to travel to, and you will find rest in those old paths. Now, this is my message to you, that we have to go back to the old path. We have to go back to the original path. We have to go back to the beginning. We have to go back to Mount Sinai and discover what Adonai told our forefathers. And we start walking in those laws, walking in those precepts, walking in those commandments. Once we do that, once we find ourselves doing all those things, the blessings he promised in Deuteronomy 28 are going to follow us. We have to start doing that now. We have got no choice but to do that. Our relationship with Adonai of Israel is only cemented on us doing his will, on us walking the life which he wants us to walk. He wants us to walk in the Torah life, and we have to do that. This is the only way we can do that.
You know, many people, they would love to meet one of the founding fathers, someone who's connected to them. But your grandfather was the one of the founding fathers of the state of Israel.
Yes, he was.
Tell us about this.
Yes, he was. The generation of my grandparents was the generation of the first Jews to take on Zionism as an ideology and take on this idea of establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And he was very active. He became a leader within the movement. He was a member of the de facto Jewish government before the State of Israel was established. And he was one of the signers on the Declaration of Independence when the State of Israel was established.
And then from there, your father actually, he was the general.
My father was, yes, both my parents were born in Palestine. So they're the first generation Israelis, if you will, first generation Jews who were born there. And my father, as a young man, while still in high school, joined the Zionist militia. He became an officer. So in the War of 1948, when the Zionists occupied most of Palestine, he was an officer already. And then he remained in the military as a career officer. And by 1967, he was already a general and a member of the Israeli Central Command, the High Command.
Now, something happened in your life, something very sad and tragic, that your niece, she was killed by a suicide bomber. Is that right?
That's right. In terms of responsible, both she and her husband said, we hold the Israeli government responsible for our daughter's death because when you maintain such a brutal oppression and a brutal occupation against another nation, when you take away people's land and you destroy their homes, when you incarcerate their fathers and quite often their mothers, when you shoot their brothers and sisters in their school, in the schoolyards, this is what we get. This is the price that you pay as a society that maintains such a brutal oppression and occupation against another people. There's a price to be paid, and this is the price that we pay, and therefore they both felt that they both held the Israeli government responsible because the Israeli government is responsible for the reality that exists there.
Now, someone just said that's an anti-Semitic statement you just made. Somebody's pointing the finger and say, this guy's anti-Semitic. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I'm Jewish, so being anti-Semitic is nonsense. Number one. Number two, being anti-Semitic means being racist against Jews. I'm not racist against Jews. But I am critical of the State of Israel. I'm critical of Zionism, which has really nothing to do with Jews, although they claim to. So there's nothing anti-Semitic about criticizing Israel. In fact, most Jews don't even live there. Most Jews never accepted Zionism, so I don't think that has anything to do with it. And it's a claim that's being thrown out when there's nothing else to say. When the other side, the pro-Israeli side, the side that supports the violence in Palestine, has nothing to say, they say anti-Semitic. Well, so they say anti-Semitic.
What if someone says, look, he's just a self-hating Jew? Have you heard this statement?
Yeah, well, I certainly don't hate myself, so that's nonsense. Yeah. And I don't hate anybody else. I think it's one of those things they throw at you when they've got no argument.
I just had a rabbi give me an analogy. He said, look, imagine you left your home and then someone came and occupied it and then you try to get it back and then they went to the judge. Have you heard some of these analogies? Maybe you can.
Yeah, that's assuming that, that's taking it into a place which I don't usually go. That's making the assumption that today's Jews are really the descendants of the ancient Hebrews that used to live in that part of the world some 3,000 years ago. That's a bit of a stretch for me. And even if it was true, I don't think I agree with him. It doesn't justify. I did not live there 3,000 years ago. My grandparents immigrated from Ukraine. Their parents, their grandparents didn't live there. And I don't know any Jew that can trace his or her ancestors back to the ancient Hebrews. So that's a lot of myth there. And I don't think it's relevant.